IronOverLoad.io Hardcore Podcast, episode Lucky 13. Today we're going to be doing Anavar and Winstrol stacked. Steve here in the Mobster. What's up, buddy?
It's all good, fella. What big was one of his guys? Pay attention. The information you need is in these podcasts.
So we're going to discuss how to best use Anavar and Winstrol together. We're going to talk first. Let's get into advantages and disadvantages of doing oral only cycles. So a lot of guys out there might say they don't believe in oral only cycles, and that's fine. That's their opinion, and I respect it. Because there are some disadvantages to doing orals. One of the disadvantages of doing orals is you've got to keep taking them every day in, day out. Once a day, twice a day, maybe even 3 times a day. Just depends on what you're taking. So in this case, with Anavar and Winstrol, once or twice a day would suffice in taking them. But let's say you're taking Anavar, you got 10 milligram tablets, and you've got to run 50 milligrams. You got to take 5 tablets, during the day. So you might take 2 in the morning, 3 in the evening, or 3 in the morning, 2 in the evening, and you may miss a dose by accident. With injectables, you can just inject once or twice a week. Using a long ester, even once every 2 weeks with a very long ester, and that's it. It's done and over with. It takes you about a minute to do it, and you don't got to worry about it again for another week or two. But with orals, you got to constantly remember to take it, and you've constantly got pills laying around your house and your desk and everything. Well, and it kind of is weird, and also sometimes these orals are they've got fillers in them. And sometimes these sources, they use really cheap fillers. So you're taking basically a little bit of sugar when you take these orals. So you want to make sure, obviously, with orals, you get a high quality brand that doesn't use a lot of, bad fillers, when they're using it. So, those are the disadvantages of using oral only cycle. Also length, injectable, you can run it 12, 14, 16 weeks. Then you got to worry about recovery. But with a oral, especially the ones that are liver toxic, as Anavar and Winstrol both are, you could be running into some liver issues. So, those are the main disadvantages and advantages. But at the end of the day, a lot of people one of the advantages of orals is they kick in a lot quicker than a long ester injectable. So you run an oral cycle like this, you'll feel it within a week. You're going to start feeling those pumps within a week when you're on it. You run an injectable, you may not feel the pumps for 3, 4, 5 weeks because it's not going to reach peak in your system. If it has a 12-day half-life, 10-day half-life, it's going to take 50 days to peak in your system. Orals that have maybe a 12-hour half-life or 8-hour half-life, they'll be peaking in your system within a few days. So those are the differences. So, Mobster, what other differences would you say are advantages and disadvantages?
I think it's interesting for me. I mean, never been a great big fan of pinning, but when it's a necessity, and when I'm in a competition mode or big competitions, especially back in the day, I did what needed to be done. What you've also got, Steve, is funny enough, especially for new guys that are coming into the sport for the first time and considering using performance enhancing drugs, it's by association. Drug users use needles. Drug users, listen, guys, you're uncomfortable taking an oral steroid, but you're okay with taking aspirin. That's a pharmaceutical thing. It's been used for medical purposes. So sometimes it's one of the things like Steve Smith said, you're going to work, you're doing a desk job, you're out on the road, whatever, and you're popping a pill. And I don't have those kind of work colleagues, and I don't, because I don't work at all anymore, but I never had those kind of work colleagues where someone says, oh, why are you taking a pill? And I've always had that kind of personality, be none of your damn business. I'm taking a pill. What's the problem? Why do you need to know what I'm doing? It's kind of crazy. But again, I understand it. There are companies both here and in America where, drug use is frowned on. You're not taking something to get high, guys. You're taking something for sporting benefits, to add muscle, to be faster, to be leaner. But there's still this idea of the association with drugs. Now, if you was to sit at your desk and pull out a syringe, people will probably freak out. You're not a diabetic. You're not injecting insulin. And you've also got a same one as we've had this before, Steve, where the wives or girlfriends, if they're okay with you taking steroids, they don't want you taking drugs around the kids. And I understand that. And for me, the idea as a father and a grandfather, as I am, I wouldn't want one of my grandkids to come across a syringe. Now, I'm not that kind of person. It's always going to be in a sharps box, it's going to be locked in a glass drawer. It's not going to be an issue. But imagine that situation if you went to a buddy's house and there was a syringe there for a kid to pick up. So I get the association. So it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. I will say, as I agree with Steve, typically most oral cycles are run for less time, and we're going to get to the dosages and cycles, etc. briefly. I agree specifically with one of the mods, etc. on the forum in regards to 4 to 8 weeks is probably the preferred time, especially as Steve said, with regards to toxicity. And there's also possibly one further advantage, not something I'm particularly keen on myself, Steve, but you know how this works, where the guys will sometimes use an oral as a Kickstarter. And that I always ask with regards to the Kickstarter, Steve, show me the end benefit. I understand the benefit at the beginning of getting your testosterone levels high in short time. You can do that with a shorter ester as well as a longer ester of the same drug, of say testosterone, for example. But equally, I get what guys, they want the steroid in the system, and they want it in there as quickly as possible. They want to get results as quickly as possible. However, as I say, the end result is what matters, not how quickly your testosterone levels are boosted, but how much muscle you added, how much fat you lost, how much weight was added to the bar. The end result should be the important thing, guys, not how quickly your system is boosted. There is a smaller element, and again, this actually applies to orals, Steve. I think you and I have talked about this on previous podcasts. With some orals, there's actually a sense of, and I believe Debo is one of the ones that I think you've mentioned, Steve, of the sense of well-being, that you almost, as you said already, within a very short period of time, literally sometimes 18, 24, 36 hours, guys, you know that you're on steroids. You have a sense of, and a good example where that would be with the pumps in the gym, very quickly, far quickly than say a medium or long acting steroid injectable. So yeah, those are there. Some of it is literally how you perceive orals versus injectables, and that's down to your personal preference. And again, if it's a family environment, living with a partner, etc. And some of it is literally down to the toxicity with regards to the necessity of toxicity of how oral steroids are created, and the need for, which we will again get into, ways of protecting the liver, the kidneys, and your endocrine system when you're using steroids. And also, as I said, again, specifically for guys wanting to feel like they're on steroids as quickly as possible. And that includes, with some drugs, the great pumps that those drugs will give you. And again, that is within, as Steve said, 2 days, 3 days. So yeah, back to you, Steve.
One more thing to add, I just want to be clear, is that injectables are still liver toxic. A lot of people think, oh my God, injectables aren't liver toxic. You shouldn't use oral only cycles because orals are liver toxic. It's just not true. Any foreign substance you put in your body is gonna hammer your kidneys and liver. I mean, it's just how it is. So if you understand the way organs work, so we're gonna get into how to protect your liver, by the way, later in this podcast. But next thing we're gonna talk about a little bit about each compound. Now Anavar is one of those that was really popular back in your day, Mobster, back in the 80s, and it was banned in the United States, and then it was brought back a few years later. But during that ban, really guys were all over it. They wanted it. So the price of Anavar just shot up. You wanna make something go up in value, ban it or make it really, really hard to get. So really what was happening during those 3 years when it was impossible to find is people who had it stored like in their back closet or something, they were able to sell it for like 3, 4, 5 times what they paid for it because of the demand. So Anavar is a great oral steroid, very popular. And the reason it was so popular in those days, back in your day, Mobster, was because it wouldn't aromatize into estrogen. So unlike Dianabol, which aromatized heavily into estrogen, they were using Anavar and they were loving it because they didn't have to worry about getting gynecomastia. They didn't have to worry about any estrogen side effect, water retention, bloat, et cetera, et cetera. And it made it easier to recover from as well, because when you came off cycle, your estrogen wasn't sky high. So recovery, really hard to recover your testosterone levels when your estrogen is high. So guys in those days would have to really struggle with recovery. So it'd be a boom or bust situation where they'd run a cycle, blow it up, and get a lot of size, and then they lose most of it all because they didn't have access to the PCT and estrogen blocking aromatase inhibitors that we have started getting, in the 90s and 2000s. So, but Anavar stayed, expensive, and it stayed hard to get. Even today, a lot of underground labs are selling bunk Anavar. So that's one of the most important things to realize with Anavar is a lot of the Anavar that's out there is fake. So you want to make sure you get legitimate Anavar. Come on the forums, make sure you're using an approved source. That's one thing about that's a couple things about Anavar right there. Another thing about Anavar is it's one of the few steroids that can directly help burn body fat on the body because of the way it's structurally made. So a lot of guys will run Anavar for cutting. So this cycle is obviously a cutting cycle. And this is why you would use Anavar, and definitely why you would use Winstrol. So there's a couple little nuggets about Anavar, and we'll get into dosages and stuff in a minute. But when it comes to Winstrol, what is Winstrol good at? Winstrol on structurally, Mobster, DHT derivative, straight DHT derivative. So it's not going to aromatize the estrogen at all, and it's also going to dry the crap out of you. So when you run the Winstrol, you're going to notice your joints dry out. It's going to feel really weird. It's going to feel like a rubber band was tied to your joints when you try to do a reflex. Let's say you're doing a curl, for example, or doing leg curls or doing squats or something. You're going to feel that dryness. So that's what Winstrol is for. So if you really want to cut down hard, this is a really good stack using Anavar and Winstrol. So Mobster, tell us a little bit about Anavar. Tell us a little bit on Winstrol. What's been your experiences using them?
I mean, as you know, Steve, from previous podcasts and via the forums, guys, I'm a big fan of Anavar, big time. And I've used it specifically for strength. I've actually said on previous podcasts, Steve, I would rarely put on more than 5 pounds on an Anavar cycle. I had the pleasure of having stuff made for me for the very reasons that Steve's talked about already. It's one of those ones where the raw powder can be slightly more expensive than others. And so if guys are looking to cut corners when they're manufacturing, they will use other drugs. So you do need a reliable source, like Steve said. The one disadvantage, such as it is, Steve, is the pumps. And I've talked about that before. But again, we'll tell you about stuff that you can do for that as well. Winstrol, and I recall this from conversations you and I have had, and again, from comments, etc., that are made on a forum. It's actually been where people could talk about a crinkling sensation. And if you're super dry, and what I mean by that is very, very lean, cutting down for a competition, certainly 10%, 8%, maybe even those 6%, you get a sensation sometimes around the tendon, that, say, for example, on the elbow, as Steve said, in the curls, coming off your tricep, well, almost a sort of crinkling sensation because it's pulling moisture from the area. That's how dry you can get. There's ways around that with regards to using, say, healthy oils, joint products, etc. But yeah, certainly both these things are drying drugs. And as Steve said, a cutting cycle. Now, something I said that we would talk about 100% was 2 things that Steve and I talked about in the pre-show. 100%, the first one is probably the most important. Guys, it doesn't matter what cycle we're discussing. If you weigh 135 pounds, as we've had members talk about this week, relatively tall, and you're talking about doing a bulking cycle or a cutting cycle, diet and training are the number 1 and number 2 before the drugs. So as an example for myself, as I said back in the day, I would gain 5 pounds on Anavar, and that would peak me out in terms of my body weight. But my aim of using Anavar was for strength. So because I wasn't focused at that point on gaining any more or losing any more, I was no problem with me whatsoever going back to my previous body weight. But guys, if you're looking to gain and you're using, say, for example, Dianabol, you can easily put on 8 and 10 pounds on a cycle. But if you don't change your diet, if you don't moderate your training after the cycle, and especially during the cycle for that matter, but after the cycle, you won't keep the gains. So diet and training are number 1 and number 2 before we talk about performance enhancing drugs. In this particular example, cardio and diet, specifically less calories, will probably be as important as the two drugs themselves in regards to getting you into shape, making you leaner and drying you out. But like we said before, if gaining weight changes the stress on the body, losing fat will stress the body sometimes as well. And especially, as Steve said already, with regards to Winstrol and that dry, literally that dry sensation. It's hard to describe unless you've experienced it, but we've had guys talk about it on the forums, and that's how effective a drug it is when it's combined with that diet, with the training, with the cardio to dry you out, to get you lean. So yeah, there's a thing sometimes from professional bodybuilding where one or two times you'll find a top pro will describe to you the sensation of being super, super ripped. And I've used this example before, Steve. Dorian Yates talking about his body fat being so low that he couldn't walk around backstage at the Olympia barefoot. He had to wear slippers because the fat between the soles, the skin on the soles of his feet and the bones, would the cushion, there's a little pad of fat there, a little cushion that makes it okay to walk around. That would dissipate. He would get so lean, it was literally, it felt like skin on bone or bone on muscle, Steve. He was super, super dry. So guys, you need to have an awareness of how you're going to feel. And Winstrol is one of those drugs that will make you feel if you are dry, if you are controlling your diet and your nutrition and your training, and you do get down to those low percentages, you will feel how Winstrol makes you feel. Super important there, Steve. Back to you.
All right, so let's talk about dosage and length of cycle. So, bottom line here, I would say, 4 weeks would be something to consider minimum. And I would go no more than 8 weeks. So 6 weeks, probably the sweet spot. And I would say with dosing, when you're stacking them both, no more than 50 milligrams of Anavar and no more than 50 milligrams of Winstrol. And that's even pushing it. So in some situations, if you want to go more conservative, you could say you could do 25 milligrams of each instead of 50 milligrams of each. I know with me, I run 50 milligrams of Winstrol and my head hair was falling out. And I'm not even prone to hair loss, really. So you want to factor that in. Now, Anavar, even though it's also a DHT derivative, it's not as harsh the way it's structurally made, where it doesn't shed your head hair on its own. But stacking it with something like Winstrol, now you're stacking 2 DHTs, and now you're at greater risk of head hair issues. So you may want to start off with 25 milligrams the first time you run this stack, and you will get good results on just 25 milligrams. I mean, I'm not here to sell you guys steroids and try to get you to buy more steroids. Okay, we're completely neutral here. So, but if I was trying to sell you steroids, I'd be like, oh, run 50, run 75, run 100,
run 100, run 200. Yeah.
But that's not what we're trying to do here.
For a second. So I just want to jump in very quickly. So as an example with Anavar, guys, the sweet spot for Anavar on its own, run solo, as Steve said, is 50 milligrams. 100%. I'd run that multiple times, 2-3 times off the top of my head, with 50 milligrams. But again, that was solo. So as Steve said, especially for your first cycle, because that's when you learn how you respond to performance enhancing drugs, guys, and then keep it real simple for those reasons, 50 milligrams of Anavar would be great. But 50 milligrams of Anavar and Winstrol together, maybe not so much. The other thing that I would also like to mention with regards to any cycle, and especially a cutting cycle, guys, think about this. So let's say that you do 4, 6, or as Steve said, and again, I agree with it 100%, 8 weeks at a maximum. I would actually put this in towards the end of the time. So for our argument's sake, let's say that I decide today that I want to cut. And let's say that I give myself 16 weeks. So that would be 8 weeks with no drugs, but the diet and the cardio are in there. And then the next 4, 6, 8 weeks would be with the drugs to produce the ultimate end result. So don't necessarily have to wait to start a training and nutrition program at the same time as the drugs. They can come in later on. They don't have to be run so the diet and the training and everything's all in that 4 to 6 or 8 week period. It doesn't have to work like that. And I use that especially when we're talking about guys getting in shape for holidays or competitions or modeling gigs or whatever, guys. You don't have to start the training and the nutrition on the day that you start the drugs, the performance enhancing drug cycle. You have a kind of run up. You're kind of getting yourself ready. Your metabolism is starting to tick over. So there's a trick for you as well, guys. Think about it in those terms too. You're not just getting cut in 4 weeks. because it should be a longer, more lifestyle orientated way of thinking anyway. So yeah, and I especially talk about this when I'm training for competitions in the past. If let's go back to Anavar again, Steve, that would probably be 8 weeks, but my training should be at least 12 to 16 weeks. So guys, again, I reiterate, the training and nutrition can start today, but the 4, the 6, or the 8 weeks can start halfway through that overall approach to getting into shape, that overall approach to being strong for a competition or whatever using the performance enhancing drugs. And that especially applies in this circumstance with guys looking to get into shape. I say this a million times, Steve, it's another tip. Do not wait until you're thinking about the holidays. Start getting into shape now. You should be thinking about March, starting to think about getting into shape. Stop bulking, start cutting slowly but surely. And then when the holiday is 8 weeks out, then we introduce the cutting products. Then we introduce the SARM. Then we introduce the anabolic steroids. And then everything goes into overdrive and we take everything up a notch. So there's another tip for you guys.
All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to get back into liver toxicity again. So both these compounds are structurally liver toxic. They're 17 alpha alkylated. The reason for that is obviously we want these orals to be absorbed properly and to be useful in the body.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be able to just, abuse the crap out of it and ruin our liver in the process. So when you're on cycle, it's normal for your liver values to, shoot up. Okay. So that's going to be strain. And, we're going to, you may not feel the effects, but if you run blood work, you definitely see it in your blood work. So what's going to happen is if you don't take care of your liver on cycle, it's going to affect everything else in your body. And it's going to basically impede your gains. It's going to make you feel tired. It's going to affect your sleep. It's going to affect your appetite across the board. It's going to affect you. It's going to affect the way you think even. So we want to make sure that we're running support supplements when we're on cycle. So very important to run a good quality liver support supplement that includes TUDCA, that includes milk thistle, that includes picarilin, all these good liver support ingredients that are in a product like N2Guard. N2Guard has at least 6 or 7 liver supplements in it. So I highly recommend N2Guard is a great one to get for it. It basically covers all bases across the board, but especially your liver. So, but here's the thing though, when you're taking liver support, right? You don't want to take it with the oral. You want to take it at least an hour and a half away from it, either before or after. Because if you take it with the oral, it could affect the way the oral performs in the body itself. So you want to basically make it, let's say you take your Anavar and Winstrol, say 9 a.m. You want to wait till about 10:30, 11 a.m. or later to go ahead and take the N2Guard. So you'd run the N2Guard 7 caps a day, and you'd be good to go. So just run it away from each other. Don't run them at the same time within 90 minutes. And it's a great product. And we see all the time guys who have liver strain and then they take N2Guard and their liver values improve substantially. So it's really something you definitely want to use on cycle.
Quick tip again, guys. I mean, something we have stickies on the forums with regards to PCT, but something you can actually do, and again, it depends on the half-life of the drug. These two both are relatively short half-lives, especially as orals, of course, is run it for a brief period afterwards, in that little gap between the end of the cycle and beginning of PCT. So there's a little tip for you guys. If you buy a bottle, and it lasts longer than the period of time, or 2 bottles, and it lasts longer than the period of time that you're on cycle, there's a little bit left. Run it through a few extra days, maybe the week to 10 days afterwards, while your body's still processing the drugs. Very simply, in terms of the whole business with regards to drug use and the effect on the body, it's as simple as this, guys. You're taking a hormone, which is going to stress your body. There's loads of things you can do to stress your body, whether it's working too hard, 16, 18 hours a day, whether it's drinking too much alcohol, whether it's taking actually even prescription drugs. All these things can have an effect on your body, from ibuprofen, Advil, etc., affecting your stomach and your gut, to penicillin. You can have allergic responses and so on and so forth. And here we are taking what was a prescription drug at more than prescription levels. So quite simply, again, also testosterone comes from cholesterol, which is a fat, in simple terms, and your body will sometimes treat these things like food, and hence the alkalization, to protect it so that it gets into your system and does what it wants you to do, from both the original medical purposes to our sports-specific, sports enhancement, performance enhancement purposes. So we don't want it broken down by the body and excreted. We want it in the body. We want it in the bloodstream. We want it going to those testosterone and anabolic receptors in our body and making us strong, making us lean. So we have to protect it for that reason. But the protection, the alkalization, is a stressor. And we're already training like maniacs. We're already killing it, as we like to say, down the gym. We're already doing super clean diets, especially when we're cutting down. We're already sometimes training real hard and dieting real hard. Makes you feel bad, but you're looking for an end result. And then you're taking an oral steroid, which can, as Steve said already, is another form of stress. So to negate those stresses, as a good example, Steve talked about Tudka. I think Tudka is a great one, along with taurine, that's going to stop you having those god-awful VAR pumps. It's going to, don't forget, guys, it can thicken the blood, it can enhance oxygen uptake. Again, this is with Debo, for example, so you can get pumps that are actually uncomfortable. So there's a bunch of things that we need to do. We are trying to push the body anabolically to get lean in this case, or to gain muscle, or get stronger in other cases, and that stress on the body will kick back. It's as simple as that. So we try to do things to stop that kicking back, to make it easier to deal with, and that's the reason why we do this. And ultimately, and this is more of an outside the industry, outside of bodybuilding thing, there's a great perception that taking steroids is bad, and we are trying as best we possibly can to negate any of the negative attributes either on our body or what people perceive. So, we can do stuff to get rid of acne. We can do stuff that we don't have to go to the doctor, because we're sensible, because we listen to this podcast and we get as much information about protecting ourselves while still getting stronger, while still getting leaner, while still adding muscle, which is what it's all about, guys. Back to you, Steve.
All right, guys. So a couple training and diet tips I wanted to share with you guys. And I'll let Mobster chime in too. So first training tip, when you're using this cycle, don't go heavy and low reps, because your joints will not tolerate it, and you're going to do more harm. You'll do more harm than good. Okay. So, you're using Winstrol here. Know the compound you're using. So I go high reps, lower weight. You'll live. Leave the ego at home. You'll live doing lower weights and higher reps. You'll take more advantage of the pumps. The pumps are going to be incredible on the cycle. And then a diet tip I can give you: learn about fasting, because this cycle is great for recomp, and you don't have to eat a lot on this cycle. Your appetite should not go up on this cycle. Okay. So you don't have to worry about getting the carb cravings. You don't have to worry about all that stuff with some other steroids like Tremolo, for example. So look into fasting. Pradip Jamnadas, Jamnadas, Dr. Pradip Jamnadas, great guy to learn about fasting. He has a lot of YouTube videos. Dr. Jason Fung is another guy, great guy who has a lot of videos. And these guys are doctors. They're actually in the field. They're not some, YouTuber, okay, random YouTuber. So these are great guys to learn from. But learn fasting. It's a weapon if you want to cut down. So if you're like 15% body fat and you want to get under 10%, you're not going to just be able to run this cycle and eat in a caloric deficit and get there. You're going to have to add fasting as a weapon to really shred up. And it's in our DNA to do it. So definitely get it done. So Mobster, give us a training and a diet tip, and take us to the disclaimer. Great show.
Right, so both training and diet, Steve. One of the things that sometimes happens, especially when you're trying to cut, and even to guys that are trying to bulk, is sometimes it's real difficult to stick to it. You're trying, you want that six pack, you want to look amazing on the beach, you want to be ripped, but it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you've just woke up from a good sleep, God knows what's happened, and you're hungry, you're craving. And we've all seen the memes and the photographs of the fridge light on and people posting up notes on the fridge door. This is this is one of those things when you're cutting down, especially with the Anavar and Winstrol, as Steve said, you need to remind yourself what's happening. What are you doing this for? It is a moment in time, a few weeks out of a lifetime, when you need to stick to it. And that is a big thing. So find, whether it's a note on the door, whether it's like your wife waking up and nudging your ribs, where the fuck do you think you're going, motherfucker? Get the fuck back here. You ain't having no snacks at 3 o'clock in the morning. We want to look good. We got that wedding coming up. We want to look good. I've got to get to my dress. We want to look good. It's like something out of a Rocky movie. You need to have that mantra going on and you need to stick to it. Post a log on the forum, guys. We'll help you stick to it. Something else, and I said that I was going to include this in today's, and in fact, any podcast that we do similar to these, Steve. I think sometimes, guys, on the forums, you will come on and you will ask us about a specific performance enhancing drug cycle. So, for example, as we are talking here today, Anavar and Winstrol, but you won't necessarily say why you're doing the cycle. Now, that's actually super, super important. In this podcast, we're telling you it's a cutting cycle. But sometimes on a forum, a buddy at the gym has said, oh, you want to get in shape? You should do Winstrol and Anavar. But he won't explain how it works. That's what this podcast does. And you come onto the forum and you'll say, I'm going to use Winstrol and Anavar. And I will say, to what end? Because if you don't know any better, if you hadn't done your research, if you haven't listened to this podcast, you might be the kind of guy that says, oh, that's what my mate down the gym said, or that's what the fellow with the big bag of drugs in the boot of his car, the trunk of his car said, but you actually want to gain. So I will always say to you, what's the purpose of the cycle? What's the aim? It doesn't matter what drug we're talking about, what cycle we're talking about. Please make sure that you include, when you're posting about these on the forums, I'm looking to cut down, I'm looking to gain, I'm looking to get stronger, I want to lose my love handles. Tell us what the cycle's for, because you might have been sold a patsy. You might have been told that a drug cycle is great for what you want, but you haven't included the diet, and the person that was selling you the drugs didn't mention that. We will always do that. Our approved sponsors will do that. They will say, this drug is good for this drug is good for that. And they're also, like we are doing right here, right now, give you suggested dosages. And they want, like we do, like Steve said, we're not looking to sell you a ton of drugs, and neither are the sponsors. It doesn't sound, that sounds like a sort of contradiction in terms, but the kind of people that we approve are the ones that want you as a regular customer who gets results. That's why we give you solid ass information that's going to last for the next 20 years on this podcast. You can come back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road, guys, and the information that we're giving you today will be as solid then as it is now. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours and ours alone. It is our view and is based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.